Welcome to an introduction to the wisdom of tarot, to a understanding of the tarot as a mirror of our divine essence and how we as humans evolve in consciousness. The tarot as a secret code of wisdom embedded in the archetypes, the universal archetypes that mirror the collective psyche and our history and evolution through time and space in the 3D world, but also in the fourth dimensional and fifth dimensional worlds. And shows us how we can transcend, transmute, and evolve to higher states of being. So I am delighted to share this exploration with you as we go in the course of tarot, explaining the basics as well, the basics of what comprises a tarot deck, and the various meanings of the 78 cards therein. So we will look at both detail and the greater wisdom and meanings, and how to combine and understand these meanings, these very spiritual truths, soul truths, and how they relate to you in your real everyday life as well. So let's begin with a bit of history to understand where the tarot came from, how it evolved to be a tool of divination that it is today. So most books you would read, and there are several I could recommend to you. One would be the Tarot for Yourself workbook by Mary Greer, who is a woman from my hometown in California, who is now in her wise elder years. And she shared a beautiful approach to the tarot, which calls on the understanding of it as a psychological and spiritual tool, which I am an advocate of. She gave me a good foundation in understanding the correlations between the psyche and the symbolism. So I recommend her workbook for beginners, and I will make references to some of her methods along the way. So in looking at the books, once again, we discover that there are Egyptian symbolic roots in the tarot. There are Kabbalist, Judaic, mystical symbolism interwoven in the tarot. And then there are Christian symbolism also appearing in the tarot. So it's an interweaving of different ideologies or belief systems that shows us how consciousness is approached by religion, for one, but it's not to constrain us in these ideologies or these belief systems, because the references are there because most of us who use the tarot or are curious about the tarot are coming from a largely Western paradigm of consciousness. And so these are just socio-cultural references, really, that our psyches naturally gravitate towards and have a subconscious understanding of symbolism that relates to the Western psyche. In Asia, there's a completely different systems in place that mirror the psyches of the Asian consciousness, for example. They would use the I Ching over the tarot, or they would use feng shui and other symbolic systems. So, and in India, the same. We would have Vedic astrology, for example, rather than Western astrology. So when we go around the world, we're going to find different tools work with different cultural psyches. And so we have to understand that tarot is very much a human tool and a cultural tool. And the only reason this is relevant is because it relates to what we naturally have an understanding of in archetypes. Archetypes are universal symbols that can be tapped into anywhere in the world and mirror back important truths about the human psyche. However, they are, let's say, embellished or expanded on in relevance to symbols that we associate with in our cultures. So in the end, just to note that the tarot is not the end all and be all, however much I love it and however much I've worked with it for decades of my life as both a tarot reader and as a lover of beautiful artistic images and the symbolic world. But if all the tarot decks in the world were burned and no longer existed, I would be fine, and all of us would be fine, because there are many tools that lead to this higher consciousness and to this understanding of universal laws and wisdom. And we can tap into that through various means. And there's not one way to the source. There's as many differences and variations in the world that exist. There are variations in the way we can connect with our divinity, with our source. So having said that, I do love the tarot for its beautiful imagery, and because I was born in the West, the Western world, and so I feel comfortable. I feel at home with the symbolism. It's familiar to my psyche, and perhaps to many of yours as well. So when we have these socio-cultural or religious references, it's only because we're familiar with them and comfortable with them that they make sense to us. That even if we don't understand the meanings of all the symbolism at first glance, they still register in our subconscious, and we remember their meanings, if only subconsciously. And the meanings speak to us, speak to our souls, speak to a deeper part of ourselves, and we recognize their truths. So we're going to explore these truths together. So back to the history, or herstory, if you would like. It's both a masculine and a feminine story that again has interpretation. So we look at how tarot evolved from Egypt. Then clearly, as Egypt is on the edge of Africa and close to the Middle East, it traversed over into the Middle East, where it picked up the Judaic mystical traditions and made its way eventually over to Europe. And we discover the very first known tarot deck in Italy in the 14th century. And this very first tarot deck that we know of by the books is known as the Sforza Visconti deck. And I will give you an example. So here, for example, is the Queen of Discs from the Sforza Visconti deck. You can see the gold leaf in this deck and the simple medieval design. And we see this beautiful disc with a 5-pointed star, which is one of those archetypal symbols from Christianity. It so happens the 5-pointed star is symbolic of one spray of energy coming down through the crown of the head from the higher source, be it the sun, be it the center of our galaxy, be it the divinity that connects all life, all existence, that this higher divine energy comes down from the heavens, channels in through the crown of our head, and then fills our human form and stretches out through our limbs, the hands and the legs, and essentially creates this sacred geometry, this energetic form of the human embodiment. So essentially the 5-pointed star is symbolic of divine embodiment, or the soul as one with the body. And when we have this connection, we have a kind of power, like a queen here, the power to hold this energy within us and work its magic, if you like. And in the case of the Queen of Pentacles, just is to say that that is the power to manifest and create with the universe what we like when we are truly aligned and allowing our divinity to be at home in our body, for example. So that is a little snapshot of the Sforza Visconti deck. And these gold leafed cards, the 78 cards, are present in the deck. And we must question why. Why did this elite ruling family, the Sforzas and the Viscontis, two elite ruling families, hold the power of these cards with them? And why did they make them so precious by gilding them and keeping them safe? And they ruled Italy for centuries. And we can only speculate about why, because the books don't really explain that. And we might guess, of course, that if you have a position of power, you want to keep your power. And one way to access power is through knowledge. Especially in the Middle Ages, the more knowledge you had, the more power you had. So knowledge is power. And this was a secret code, as I mentioned, of wisdom and knowledge that had passed down through the ages, kept in the hands of the few that might be able to interpret the symbolism, make sense of it, and guard it carefully, so that they could have access to that power, and without judgment, whether they use that for good or quote unquote bad. In a spiritual sense, we learn that there is no judgment of good or bad, ultimately. But in any case, the point is, if you understand the laws of the universe that are shown in the symbolism of the tarot, you can work the magic and power of the universe. So this is why we might guess that the Savorsis and the Viscontis held this knowledge in the cards. And then eventually we might speculate as well that gypsy servants or whomever managed to get their hands on these symbolic cards, either by transcribing their own version or stealing them, and away they went throughout Europe. So we see many decks emerge even in the Middle Ages. We see the Marseille deck in France, for example. And these were all very simple illustrations in these cards, very medieval, like woodcuts in their nature. So, for example, with the Savorsa Visconti, again, here's another simple image there of the Seven of Discs, and here's the back, which is like a classic artwork that was used in churches and so on. And this simplicity still had meaning with numbers. There was numerology in it. There is the archetypes of queen, king, fool, devil, and so on. These archetypes are ones that everyone can associate with. And for example, queen, we can support that meaning as being one of power. The king is a mastery of power or an authority archetype. And we have the fool, which is the innocent, mindless one. Or we also have the wise man featured in the Hermit card, the 9th major arcana. So these archetypes, everybody has some association or relationship with, and that's how the intuitive mind works. The subconscious mind works. It makes associations with classic symbolism that everybody recognizes on some level. So these simple images traveled through Europe and eventually made their way through Celtic lands, probably crossing over from France to England through the channel there. And when we recognize the next very popular classic tarot decks, they were appearing in the 1800s in England. So those decks are the Sir Rider-Waite Smith deck, which is one I use for teaching purposes, simply because it is so rich in archetypal symbolism, and it's very clear and very good for a foundation in tarot. I don't actually use it for my readings because some of those symbols are quite dark and doom and gloom-ish in their imagery. But in fact, this doom and gloom imagery doesn't necessarily have that meaning. It's a more symbolic meaning of awakening us to certain truths. So it doesn't have to be quote unquote bad or negative. And we can see the intricacy of meanings, the Egyptian ones. For example, we might see the Ankh in the classic Hierophant image, the 5th major arcana in tarot. And we may see the crown of Isis and the high priestess image in the major arcana, for example. We also see the Judaic Kabbalist symbolism, as we would see in the Wheel of Fortune, where we see Judaic symbols in this wheel of life. And we see as well the Christian symbolism. So there's churches. For example, in the Three of Pentacles, we see the building of a church. We see angel images, and we see the resurrection in the judgment card, for example. So we're, again, working with classic images from our Christian Judeo paradigm that we in the West largely grow up with. And so these are references to help us understand a deeper spiritual history. But it's not partial to any particular religion, in fact, and it's not against any particular religion either. So when some people get fearful about the tarot and they think it's associated with the devil or something sinister, something dark and dodgy and evil, it's only because people fear what they don't understand. But there's nothing negative or dark really about the tarot. It's in fact a tool of enlightenment and a way to access our higher knowledge and wisdom, a tool that's helpful in illuminating the deeper meanings of our beings. So if it's used for doom and gloom purposes, and there are some tarot readers out there doing just that, that is a matter of ego and control by those tarot readers. That if they are using it to put fear in people, fear is a classic way to control people, to gain power over people, much in a vampiric sort of way. So if you are in connection with such a tarot reader, I would just say be mindful that they may be taking your energy from you. And I would be of the position that we all have a right to hold our own energies and not give them away except by free will and choice. And so that involves being more empowered in yourself. And that brings me to say that I advocate the tarot as a tool of empowerment, number one. So just as the Sforza Viscontis used the tarot as a tool for their own elite power, and many kingdoms that followed did the same. Today, we have the privilege to use this tool as a tool of our own empowerment and the empowerment of others. But back to the Sir Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So I will show you an example of that. Now, there's two versions of the Sir Rider-Waite-Smith. This is a box that holds my Sir Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and there's its version of the sun pictured. And in this classic deck, there's the original version, which is the primary colors, just like the Mercedes deck would be the same, because back in the day, they didn't have as much ink variations available to them. So they used primary colors, yellow, blue, red, and black and white. And that, has an appeal to a lot of people who want that original version. But I'm of the preference of availing of the colors available today to us. Huge rainbow and variations of colors. And so we can see, for example, in this temperance card, variations of green and blue and red and pink. So you see more muted colors and variations of colors that you wouldn't have in the classic deck. And this deck is known as the Universal Waite-Smith deck, and it has this starry image, which is actually showing a figure 8 when you look at the big stars, the sign of infinity, the infinite connection with all that is. And that's the one I use to teach. And I recommend it for all my students, and they find it very helpful as a foundation. And then later on, you can choose your own favorite deck. And I've been given some beautiful decks by my mother, who brought me up with all of this esoteric wisdom. And one is the Transformational Tarot, of which I've shared some before. Here's the 8th major arcana, restoring cosmic wisdom, cosmic order, creating balance. Also the infinite 8 there. And it has this kind of background. So you can see those are well-worn cards. I've used those over the years. I also use another lovely deck called the Wheel of Life, which is very multicultural and lets us see all different cultures: Native American, Indian, Asian, Aboriginal from Australia, and so on. And I love this deck because I work with people from all over the world, all different cultures. And I like to be in service to everyone equally, without judgment or request for conformity in any sense. So Rider-Waite-Smith is lovely for channeling in all these archetypal symbols. And just notice how this deck, as we explore it, is much more embellished and enhanced with symbolism than those early medieval decks. Because we could essentially say that Rider-Waite-Smith and one of his contemporaries, Sir Aleister Crowley, also from the United Kingdom, who also channeled in all of the tarot 78 cards with esoteric, astrological, and mythological symbolism, that these fellas essentially, along with their female counterparts who were the artists of their decks, channeled in the symbolism. It was happening in the 1800s, in a time when there was the revival of mystical spiritualism, a breaking away of classic Catholicism, rigid Christian, puritanical focus on spirituality, and this kind of breaking free. So there was, in the United Kingdom in particular, a lot of mediumship going on, seances, connecting with the fairies, the elementals. Suddenly there was this big opening up and exploring of the subconscious world and the unseen world, and connecting in on multidimensional levels. Not that that's new to the planet at that point. It's been experienced through the ages, but it was more a revival of these energies past the dark ages of Christianity in Europe in particular. So this revival shows itself in the tarot. We also see those doom and gloom images from the dark ages present in the tarot as well, in the Devil card, the Death card, the Tower, and so on. So we'll be exploring all of that. So we're looking at a mirror of the history of consciousness on the planet as well, especially the Western world, and how that consciousness has evolved over time. But it's interesting because at the same time it shows the history, it also shows that it's timeless. That I still use this tool now, and I can look at what's going on with the current collective consciousness and how we are evolving here and now. And the tool of the tarot is still very much alive and educating anyone who delves into its greater meanings about what's going on the planet. And I've just done 2 recent videos on how the tarot mirrors what's happening in collective evolution in relation to COVID-19, for example, in 2020. So we can use it as a mirror for what's happening now in current events and where those are evolving based on the consciousness presence now. Of course, we can always take a quantum leap, and then perhaps the tarot will become completely obsolete at that point in time. And I'm not attached to the tarot as a symbolic belief system if that happens. It's okay. We work with the tool as long as it is of service to our highest good. And if it no longer serves, we let it go. But that's part of the wisdom as well. Not to ever be too attached to anything. But we will come to explain and understand that in relation to the symbolism with time as we go through the course of tarot. So this course I present to you is certainly not for just plain old classic fortune telling. There's plenty of courses out there for you if you prefer that. This course is for those who want to step up a level in consciousness and apply that consciousness to their real daily lives to empower each of you to be a co-creator with your reality, with your destiny, and not simply a victim of destiny, not simply a person who lets destiny happen to you. You can use the tarot as a fortune-telling tool because, in fact, what happened was after the 1800s, and even maybe before then, it became very watered down. So it eventually lost all of its 22 major arcana. So just to explain, a classic tarot deck of 78 cards has 22 major arcana. These are those very powerful soul truth cards that are universal laws or even portals, symbolic portals into different levels of consciousness in our ascension in the spiral of life, in our collective evolution. And we can see how these portals of consciousness open up in the 22 grades. And 22 itself is a very magical number, a double digit, of course. And many of you out there are familiar with the double digits and find those very exciting because a double digit is like an alignment. When things are lining up and becoming aligned with our 3D self and our higher dimensional selves. And when that happens, it's like opening up a valve, opening up a portal to other dimensions of consciousness and being. So the 22 is symbolic of opening up to higher dimensions and higher connectivity with the multidimensional universe. So when we have those powerful 22 major arcana, and then we have what looks like a classic deck of playing cards, because in the watering down of tarot, the 22 major arcana were eliminated, thrown asunder for a number of reasons. One, because some people who got their hands on them didn't understand them, or was frightened of them, or they were purposely destroyed by the powers that existed, because those powers didn't want people to have that understanding. So it got watered down, and what was remaining was pretty much a classic deck of playing cards. That's where the classic deck of playing cards for poker and playing games derived from the tarot. And so it eliminated the spiritual aspect. And by the way, the word tarot comes from the Judaic mystical book, the Torah, and is basically a condensed synopsis of many of the spiritual, symbolic meanings of the Torah, which were distilled from Egyptian roots as well, and the priestess cultures of Egypt. And remember, the priestesses raised Christ. Well, that's what the history shows us if we delve deeper into it. There were several chapters burned from the Bible, as many of us know. And those are the chapters that described the priestess, divine feminine world that raised Christ and educated him. But in any case, coming back to the relevance of tarot, so that spiritual wisdom was eliminated. We got a normal deck of playing cards, which includes the 4 suits, which appear in a normal deck of cards. So you have the wands, which are the same as the clubs in a normal deck of playing cards. The wands, still we see the little leafy bit, just like in the clubs of a card. And we have the 4-leaf clover kind of image. But I'm just looking one moment to find the set for you. Anyway, so the wands represent this beautiful energy, which I will describe in the next class when we go through the 4 suits. And then we also have the pentacles, is the other suit, which shows that 5-pointed star I mentioned, which is a special symbol of a divine embodiment. And here we have a beautiful earthy energy with the pentacles, or discs as they are known. And in a normal deck of playing cards, that would be the diamonds. So the diamonds are associated with money and wealth and things of substance, of physicality. Then we have the swords, which in a classic playing card deck is the black spades. And indeed, these are a bit blacker in their imagery. We see more dark images in the swords than any other suit. For example, the 9 of Swords or the grim 10 of Swords. Now, they look horrible, but they're not as bad as they seem. Remember, everything in the tarot is symbolic, not literal. If a tarot reader uses it as literal, they are feeding your psyche with fear and control. Remember that. The symbolic world is never, ever literal. But if you have a tarot reader tell you it's literal, that something bad is going to happen to you, and you buy into that belief system, by virtue of believing in it, you may co-create that with the universe. And therefore, whatever they said was a clairvoyant prediction of your future will happen, but only because you allow it to happen. You give it power, you give it energy, and therefore you have co-created it with them seeding you with that thought, but you've allowed that to come into your brain. So be careful of what you accept and take in with a tool like this. and learn the true symbolic meanings, not taking it at face value. And then lastly, we have the beautiful cups, the fourth suit, which shows all this beautiful water, overflowing cup there. The cups are obviously like the cup of love, the cup of life. And we will explore their meanings in the next class as well that I present here in your course. And so we have these four suits, and the cups are the beautiful hearts in a classic deck of cards, of course, because they relate to matters of the heart. So interestingly, in a normal deck of cards with these four suits, we still have the basic symbolic meanings. And I could read a normal deck of cards if I needed to, if all the tarot decks were burnt. And there was plain cards around still, I could read those just as easily, except they would be missing the major arcana. But that wouldn't matter because I can still channel that in. So it's all good. But we can guesstimate that the reason it became the watered down version was both to protect the symbolic wisdom there so that it would survive anything. But also, in some cases, to belittle that knowledge, that it's nothing but a game. It's nothing but nonsense. It's silliness, is also some of the belief out there about a tool like tarot. That if people don't think that it's a dark, witchy, devilly kind of tool, they say, it's nonsense. It's silliness. It makes no sense. There's no scientific validity to it. That's fine for people who want to believe that. Again, beliefs are a choice. And beliefs, if anything, confine us. Confine our ability to access our limitless potential. So in the end, we are not to get too attached to any beliefs or too attached to the tarot itself. It's only if it's helpful that I offer it to you with all my passion, all my delight in sharing the wisdom of this tool. And if it's not helpful and it doesn't agree with your belief systems, so be it. Or my approach doesn't agree with your belief systems, so be it. It makes no odds to me. I'm happy to serve and give. And if I'm not needed, no problem. So, but if you'd like to carry on with me in this course, we will keep going to explore the deeper truths and meanings. So looking at the 78 cards, so we have the four suits, and those go from ace to 10. And those numbers have meanings as well as the suits have meanings. And then each individual of those 40 cards has a meaning. And there's variations and nuances in those. But I would also, when I teach you about the four suits, will show you that it's like a formula. If you want a little bit of a fast track to understanding the symbolism, we will combine the meaning of the 10 numbers with the meaning of the four suits. And therefore, you really only have to learn 14 meanings rather than 40, except there are some variations, some exceptions to the rule. But you get a basic understanding. It's like learning a language. You learn the basic rules of grammar and spelling and so on, but there's always the anomaly. There's always the variation that you have to remember as well. And so it is with tarot. It's a symbolic language, just like astrology is a symbolic language. And all esoteric systems are symbolic languages. And language is a powerful tool. Words and language hold power, like spells. So when you relate to a language, you give power to what that language represents. So language is symbolic as well. So when we use the word flower. The word flower is a symbolic representation of this. So they're useful, especially when we want to connect with another human being or share something with another human being, and we can't point at the flower, but we want to talk about it. And then we can use that symbolic word to connect us with the same imaginary vision of the flower. It was the same with tarot or anything else. It's just a helpful way to talk about these higher wisdom, higher knowledge. But in the end, we don't need the tarot, and nobody needs me to teach them the tarot. We can simply just tap into the source, and I consider the source the etheric internet. So we can plug in, and that's what I do when I'm giving readings, plug into the etheric source of everything, ground in earth, keep this connection fused in my heart, and that's where I share it from in my offerings to you or to all my clients, my hundreds and thousands of clients over the years that I choose to help and they choose to receive help from me. And as we're tapping in, all the knowledge, the wisdom, the esoteric understanding can channel into me. I don't need the tool, but the tool is fun. The tool is beautiful. So, and it also, I work as, not as just as a tarot reader, but as a counselor, a life coach, a spiritual guide to others. And this tool is like a fluffy cushion in between me and the recipient, the client, that helps create a safe space, even a safe boundary between the client and myself, a talking tool, if you like, that helps connect us. And if that is its only purpose, it's perfect purpose, to have this tool that connects us. Again, language is a way that we connect with others. So tarot is a language I like, that's helpful in connecting with other humans, to talk about meaningful spiritual matters, which are the most important to me. Those are the matters that I want to spend my time sharing. And I'm not much one for small chit chat. I can do it, but it sometimes feels like a waste of energy. And so if I have this tool, it creates a nice atmosphere, a nice exchange of sharing really meaningful matters with people. And everybody loves it, because at heart, everybody wants to connect with deep, meaningful matters and talk about them and share them. So be it. So I mentioned those 4 suits. I mentioned the 22 major arcana, and there's also the remaining 16 cards, which are the royalty cards. And so we have a classic page, knight, queen, and king. So we have those for each of the 4 suits. And in the manner of Mary Greer, who I mentioned, who inspired the foundation of my tarot studies decades ago when I was a child, we can look at them not in a fortune-telling way of, okay, if it's the Knight of Cups, it's a romantic gentleman coming into your life to sweep you off your feet, who has blonde hair and blue eyes. Some of the old classic tarot descriptions would present themselves like that, very much simplistic, superficial, version of what these cards mean. They might say the Knight is a man between 20 and 25, you know. So it's a bit ridiculous because we can have all different levels of maturity, no matter what age we are, and all different levels of wisdom, no matter what age we are. We currently can dye our hair any color, even change the color of our eyes with contact lenses, get cosmetic surgery, whatever. We can change all the superficial aspects of our being. And so it's not like the Middle Ages where it might be quite literal. But here and now in evolution, we use it more as a psychological exploration of different levels of maturity and mastery of different aspects of our own beings. So we'll explore that in this course as well and go into the nuances and details of what that means for those 16 royalty or court cards, as they're known. So there you have it, the 78, the 22 major arcana, the 40 suits, ace to 10, and the 16 royalty or court cards. And we will cover all of those in this course. The 4 suits can be covered in one class. The royalty cards can be covered in one class, one session. And the major arcana take more time. So when I'm presenting it and channeling in, we'll see how many sessions that takes. It varies from time to time. I've been teaching the tarot for 25 years professionally, and every course I teach is a bit different, but I always allow the 8 weeks or 8 2-hour sessions. So we may condense that a bit, given I'm offering this course as something you're purchasing online, and you can listen at your own pace, but I will channel that in and we'll see how it fleshes out in time. But I will make sure we give you a good understanding. And I must say that most of my students have come to learn the tarot for themselves, number one, as a tool of self-empowerment and self-reflection in their own lives. But there's a good few as well who have learned the tarot from me and have gone on to become fabulous tarot readers themselves. And I'm most happy to support any one of you in becoming a proper tarot reader and making a good living from that, because there is a very high demand out there. People really need support, guidance, counseling, life coaching, and this is a beautiful tool for it. In fact, many of my students and clients have been psychotherapists, doctors, nurses, lawyers, business people, and the psychotherapist, for one, would end up using the tool in their practices. It enhances them. And in fact, I would draw on the knowledge of the great psychotherapist Carl Jung, Jung, who really was a quintessential psychologist introducing the masses to the idea of the subconscious and how we work with subconscious patterns emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and so on within us. And also how we integrate and balance different aspects of ourselves in our journey to self-actualization, self-realization, self-integration. And Carl Jung himself used the tarot because it very accurately shows that process of how we come into self-actualization. And we will explore the major arcana as such, because we see how the first 10 major arcana from 0, which starts the journey of the major arcana with the Fool, and then it progresses along, comes to the 9th major arcana, the Hermit. This first 10 cards from 0 to 9 are symbolic of our process of in the Jungian sense. And so we are going to witness this, and then we go on from there, from the 10 to the world, and we see, there's the world card. We see how we come into this higher evolution through these transpersonal cards from the 10th major arcana to the 21st. And so we will be exploring those as well. So it's quite a journey of self-discovery and exploration that is very enlightening and very empowering, and is a very much an alive tool. It's not so ancient and archaic that it's obsolete. In fact, there was many times in my journey with this exploration, I started studying the tarot as a child, since my parents had decks all around the house, and I picked them up from an early age. We had a few teachers along the way come into the family environment, and I picked up the knowledge and the tools. And my mother works as a psychic and an astrologer, so I had her mentoring as well. And my father, a very shamanic man, had his mentoring into the symbolic world of the elements: earth, air, water, fire, ether, and the Native American traditions. That also feeds into this symbolic understanding of nature that is presented in the tarot as well. And I began to embody this knowledge over time. But as I've evolved in the journey and worked with clients over the many years, I see how it evolves, the consciousness evolves, and how my consciousness has evolved working with this symbolic language, and how it's allowed me to access more of that multidimensional existence, and allowed me to channel in more and more wisdom and knowledge that's not limited by the cards themselves. It allows me just to use those as keys. The tarot works like keys to open up different portals of consciousness, as I mentioned at the start. And then I can access what we might call the Akashic records, or the etheric internet, where all knowledge is available. A library of everything you ever wanted to know, past, present, future, is available to all of us to download, to access, when we understand and learn how to do that. And the tarot is just one way that we can do that. We can unlock those mysteries, those higher esoteric texts and knowledge that is available to each and every one of us, if we so choose to explore it and access it. So I essentially would be creating an access point to be able to access. That's access, AXIS, to access, ACCESS, all that you wish to understand on the higher levels. So be it. I'm going to leave you now with all of this knowledge and inspiration, I hope, that we will carry on with in more detail as we go through the particulars of the tarot up ahead. We'll also, besides learning the 78 cards, we'll learn how to combine the meanings of the cards. I'll be teaching you my favorite, most useful spreads, both classic and ones I've created myself that work very, very well with clients, to do with relationships and life purpose. And we will have some experiential exercises for you to do to enhance your practices with the tarot and to refine your skills. So there it is. And you'll get a private session with me of Q&A so that you can address your personal questions with me. And I'm delighted and happy to support your understanding with whatever answers I can give you. Okay, so all the best to you in this exciting journey with this esoteric wisdom.